Husband humiliated his wife in court, and everyone watching believed it was the end of her life as she knew it, because she stood there alone, with no lawyer, no money, no voice, while the man who once promised to love her smiled as he tore her apart in public. Grace Miller stood in a New York courtroom feeling smaller than the wooden table in front of her, her hands shaking, her mouth dry, her mind full of fear, as her husband Daniel spoke about her like she was nothing, like she was a mistake he could erase with one court order. He laughed when she said help was coming. He told the judge she was foolish, useless, and too poor to fight him, and every word he spoke felt like a slap, slow, painful, and meant to break her spirit. People in the room watched quietly, some with pity, some with boredom, as Daniel leaned back in his chair, sure that Grace would walk out of that courtroom with nothing, no home, no money, no dignity. Grace wanted to speak. She wanted to scream that she was not weak, that she was not stupid, but fear locked her voice inside her chest, and the judge was already reaching for his gavel. And then, just as the court was about to move on without her, just as Grace felt her life closing in around her, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom began to open. Daniel did not turn around yet. Grace did. And in that moment, everything was about to change, in a way no one in that room was ready for. Grace Miller never thought her life would reach this place, a cold courtroom in New York, with strangers watching her pain like it was a show. She stood beside a long wooden table, her fingers pressed together so tight they hurt, her feet feeling heavy inside her old shoes. She wore a plain gray dress, clean but tired, like her body and her spirit. She had no bag, no papers, no lawyer sitting next to her, only silence. Across the room sat her husband, Daniel Miller. Daniel looked nothing like a man in trouble. His suit was dark and smooth, his shoes clean and shining. He sat back in his chair like someone waiting for good news. He did not look at Grace the way a husband should. He looked at her the way people look at things they are done using. Grace kept her eyes low. She had learned that looking at Daniel only brought pain. The room was full of quiet noise, small coughs, soft footsteps, chairs moving. The judge had not entered yet. People whispered to each other. Some looked at Grace with pity. Others did not look at her at all. Daniel leaned toward the man beside him, his lawyer, and spoke in a low voice, but not low enough. "She won't last 5 minutes in here," Daniel said with a short laugh. "She doesn't even have a lawyer." The lawyer gave a small smile and nodded, calm and sure. Grace heard every word. Her chest felt tight, like something heavy was sitting on it. She wanted to leave. She wanted to run back to the small room she had slept in for the past 3 weeks. But she stayed, because running had never saved her before. Daniel turned his head and finally looked at her. "Grace," he said louder now, "you still have time to stop this shame. You know you can't win." Grace lifted her eyes slowly. "I am not trying to win," she said, her voice soft. "I just want what is fair." Daniel laughed again. This time, people heard it. "Fair," he said, shaking his head. "You do not even know what that word means." Grace swallowed. She remembered when Daniel used to speak softly to her, when his voice had once made her feel safe. That man was gone. Maybe he never existed. The courtroom door opened, and a court officer walked in. "All rise," he said loudly. Everyone stood as the judge entered and took his seat. The room fell into silence. The judge looked over his papers, then lifted his eyes. "Case number 4172, he said. "Miller versus Miller." Daniel stood quickly. "Ready, Your Honor," he said, confident. The judge turned to Grace. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "I see you are without legal counsel. Are you representing yourself today?" Grace's heart dropped. "No," she said. "My lawyer is coming." Daniel let out a sound that was half laugh, half scoff. The judge looked at him sharply. "Mr. Miller," the judge said, "control yourself." Daniel raised his hands. "My apologies, Your Honor," he said. "I just find this difficult. We have been waiting for months, and my wife still cannot get herself together." Grace felt her face burn. The judge looked back at her. "How long do you expect the court to wait?" he asked. "This session began 10 minutes ago." Grace looked toward the back of the room, at the tall wooden doors. Her heart beat slow and heavy. "Just a little time," she said. "Please." Danielle stood again. "Your Honor," he said, "this is a waste of time. She has no money. I made sure of that. She froze herself the day she decided to fight me." Grace felt a sharp pain in her stomach. He said it like a joke. The judge's face hardened. "Mr. Miller," he said, "sit down." Daniel sat, but his mouth still held a smile. The judge sighed and looked at Grace. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "you must understand. Court cannot stop forever. If your lawyer does not arrive soon, we will proceed." Grace nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She remembered the morning Daniel froze the accounts. She remembered checking her phone again and again, thinking it was a mistake. She remembered calling him and hearing his calm voice. "You wanted freedom," he had said. "Now you have it." The lawyer beside Daniel leaned forward. "Your Honor," he said, "my client has been more than patient. Mrs. Miller refused a fair offer. She rejected $2 million and a car. That is generous." Grace clenched her hands. $2 million sounded like a lot to people who did not know how much Daniel owned, how many years she had stood beside him while he built his life. The judge looked tired. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "if you cannot produce counsel now, I will have no choice." Daniel leaned toward Grace and spoke softly, cruelly. "See," he said, "I told you. You are alone." Grace closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her mother. She had not spoken to her in years. She had told Daniel she was alone because it was easier than explaining a wound that never healed. She opened her eyes and spoke. "She is coming," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Please." Daniel laughed out loud. "Coming from where?" he asked. "The past. The dead. A miracle." The judge raised his gavel. "That is enough," he said. "Mrs. Miller, this is your final moment." Grace felt tears rise, but she did not let them fall. Crying in front of Daniel had never helped. She looked at the doors again. Nothing moved. Her chest felt empty. Then, without warning, the doors opened. Not slowly. They opened wide. The sound echoed through the room. Every head turned. Grace's breath stopped. Daniel frowned and turned his head, annoyed. A woman stood in the doorway. She was tall, dressed in white, her back straight, her face calm and serious. Behind her were 3 younger lawyers, all quiet, all focused. The woman walked forward, her steps steady, her eyes sharp. The courtroom was silent. Daniel felt something cold touch his spine. Grace stared, her mouth open, her hands shaking. The woman stopped near the table, then spoke. "Apologies for the delay," she said clearly. "I am here for my daughter." Grace felt the room spin. "Daughter." Daniel's smile faded. The judge leaned forward. "And you are?" he asked. The woman lifted her chin. "Margaret Adams," she said. "Attorney at law." Grace felt tears fall now, slow and heavy, because she knew her mother had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The courtroom stayed silent for a long moment after Margaret Adams spoke her name. It was the kind of silence that makes people uncomfortable, the kind where everyone feels something big is about to happen, but no one knows how bad or how good it will be. Grace could not move. Her legs felt weak. Her eyes stayed on the woman in white standing a few steps in front of her. This woman was her mother, the same woman she had not spoken to in many years. The same woman she had run away from when she was young because she was afraid of her strength. Daniel was the first to recover. He laughed, short and sharp. "This is a joke," he said. "Grace told me her mother was gone." Margaret turned slowly and looked at him. Her eyes did not show anger. They showed something colder. "She said I was gone from her life," Margaret said calmly. "Not gone from this world." Daniel's throat moved. He looked at his lawyer. "Who is this woman?" he asked, trying to sound calm. The lawyer did not answer right away. His face had lost its color. His hands trembled as he pushed his papers closer to himself, like they could protect him. The judge cleared his throat. "Mrs. Adams," he said, "you are entering this case at a very late moment." "Yes," Margaret replied, "because my daughter was cut off from her money and left with no way to reach me sooner." Grace lowered her head. Shame mixed with relief inside her. She felt like a child again. Margaret placed her hand on the table near Grace. She did not touch her yet. "Your Honor," Margaret continued, "I am here now, and I am officially representing Grace Miller." Daniel jumped to his feet. "This is not fair," he said loudly. "She is trying to delay the case." Margaret turned to the judge. "My client asked for a few minutes," she said. "She was mocked for it, humiliated and threatened, all in your courtroom." The judge looked at Daniel. "Sit down," he said. Daniel sat, but his jaw was tight. Margaret finally looked at Grace. Their eyes met. Grace saw something she had not seen in years: concern, pride, pain. "You did well," Margaret said softly. "You held on." Grace nodded, tears falling freely now. Margaret turned back to the court. "Before we continue," she said, "I need to address what has already happened here today." She picked up a thick file from one of the younger lawyers behind her and placed it on the table. The sound was heavy. "Mr. Miller claims my daughter has nothing," Margaret said, "that she is foolish, poor, and unworthy." Daniel scoffed. "She is," he muttered. Margaret looked at him again. "You froze every joint account 3 weeks ago," she said. "Correct." Daniel smiled. "Yes," he said. "Perfectly legal." Margaret nodded. "You did this knowing she had no income at that time," she said. "Knowing she could not hire legal help." Daniel shrugged. "She chose to fight," he said. "Actions have results." Margaret took a breath. "Your Honor," she said, "this man planned this moment. He wanted her alone. He wanted her scared. He wanted her silent." The judge leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" he asked. Margaret opened the file. "Yes," she said. She handed documents to the court officer. "These are bank records," she explained. "They show when the accounts were frozen and how quickly my client was left with nothing." Daniel shifted in his seat. Margaret continued. "There is also the matter of the prenuptial agreement," she said. Daniel straightened. "That agreement is solid," he said. "She signed it." Margaret nodded. "She did," she said. "The night before the wedding." Grace's hands shook. Margaret's voice stayed steady. "That night," she said, "Daniel Miller told Grace that if she did not sign, he would make sure her younger sister lost her job and that her grandmother would be forced out of her home." The courtroom reacted. Low gasps filled the room. "That is a lie," Daniel shouted. Margaret did not raise her voice. "These," she said, lifting another paper, "are text messages from that night recovered from a backup Daniel believed was deleted." The judge read quietly. His face changed. Daniel's lawyer began flipping through his own papers faster now, sweat forming on his forehead. Margaret continued. "Under New York law," she said, "a prenuptial agreement signed under threat is invalid." Daniel stood again. "She is twisting things," he said. "This is all drama." The judge slammed his gavel. "Enough," he said. "Mr. Miller, one more outburst and you will be removed." Danielle sat. Margaret moved closer to the witness stand. "Now, let us talk about money," she said. "Daniel Miller claims his worth is $35 million. Daniel nodded. "That is correct," he said. Margaret lifted another folder. "My team traced funds linked to shell companies," she said. "Companies connected to Daniel Miller." Grace looked up sharply. "Shell companies," Margaret continued, "used to move money quietly." Daniel's lawyer swallowed hard. Margaret placed the folder on the table. "The real number is closer to $98 million, she said. The room went still. Daniel laughed, but it sounded wrong. "This is insane," he said. "She is guessing." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "These funds were moved to accounts outside the country," she said, "and were not disclosed in his sworn statement." The judge looked up slowly. Mr. Miller, he said, did you disclose all assets under oath? Daniel hesitated. Yes, he said, of course. Margaret smiled, not kindly. That, she said, is perjury. Daniel's lawyer stood. Your Honor, he said quickly, we need time to review this. The judge shook his head. You had time, he said. You chose speed instead. Margaret stepped back toward Grace and placed her hand on her shoulder. This time, she did not pull away. I am sorry I was not here sooner, Margaret said quietly. Grace whispered, I thought you would not come. Margaret looked at her. I will always come, she said. Daniel watched them. For the first time that day, fear reached his eyes. The judge leaned back. This hearing will continue, he said, and it will continue carefully. Margaret lifted her head. Good, she said, because we are just beginning. Daniel's hands clenched. He did not know it yet, but everything he built was starting to fall. The courtroom felt different now, heavier, slower, like the air itself was watching what would happen next. Daniel Miller sat stiff in his chair, his hands pressed on his knees, his eyes moving from the judge to Margaret Adams and then to Grace. For the first time since the case began, he did not look sure of himself. Grace sat quietly. Her mother's hand still rested on her shoulder. That simple touch gave her strength. She remembered how alone she had felt at the start of the day, how small she had felt, how sure she was that she would lose everything. Now, something inside her was waking up. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mr. Miller, he said, you will take the stand. Daniel looked at his lawyer. Do I have to? He asked. Yes, the lawyer said softly, without looking at him. You filed this case. Daniel stood slowly and walked to the witness stand. His steps were not confident anymore. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. His voice shook when he spoke the words. Margaret walked forward. She carried no papers. She did not rush. Mr. Miller, she said, you said earlier that Grace was bad with money. Yes, Daniel replied. She never understood business. Margaret nodded. So you controlled all finances, she said. Yes, Daniel answered. Did Grace ever ask you to see bank records? Margaret asked. Daniel posed. Sometimes, he said. And what did you say? Margaret asked. That she should trust me, he said. Margaret looked at the judge, then back at Daniel. Trust, she said. Is that why you opened accounts without her name? Danielle shifted. They were business accounts, he said. Margaret spoke calmly. Business accounts used to pay for another woman's apartment, she said. Grace felt her chest tighten. Daniel raised his voice. That has nothing to do with this, he said. The judge leaned forward. It does, he said. Answer. Danielle swallowed. It was temporary, he said. I worked hard. I deserved comfort. Margaret tilted her head. And Grace, she asked, what did she deserve? Daniel did not answer. Margaret stepped closer. You used joint money to buy furniture, she said. You bought gifts, jewelry, trips. That was my money, Daniel snapped. The judge's voice cut through the room. Careful, he warned. Margaret spoke again. You hid money, she said. You moved it. You lied under oath. Daniel's breathing grew fast. I did what I had to do, he said. She would waste it. Grace stood suddenly. I never wasted anything, she said, her voice shaking but clear. The judge nodded. You may speak, he said. Grace looked at Daniel. I cooked, she said. I cleaned. I supported you. I stood beside you when you had nothing. Daniel looked away. You called me useless, Grace continued. But I held this family together. The courtroom stayed silent. Margaret nodded once, proud. No more questions, she said, stepping back. The judge leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. Mr. Miller, he said, you have shown this court who you are. Daniel's lawyer stood slowly. Your Honor, he said, I request to withdraw. Daniel turned sharply. You cannot leave me, he said. The lawyer looked at him. You lied, he said. I cannot protect that. The judge nodded. "Request noted," he said. "Sit." Daniel slumped in his chair. He was alone now. The judge cleared his throat. "I am issuing orders," he said. Grace held her breath. "All accounts belonging to Daniel Miller are frozen," the judge said. "Grace Miller will have full access." Daniel groaned. "The marital home remains with Grace," the judge continued. "Mr. Miller will leave today." Daniel stood. "You cannot do this!" he shouted. The gavel hit the table. "I can," the judge said. Grace felt tears run down her face. But this time they were not from fear. "Federal authorities will review this case," the judge said, "for fraud and false statements." Daniel's face lost all color. "Court is adjourned," the judge said. People stood. Noise filled the room. Daniel stayed seated. Grace stood with her mother. They gathered their things. Outside the courtroom, the hall felt bright. Grace took a deep breath. Then a man stepped forward. "Grace," he said. She froze. It was her father. He looked older, tired, still well-dressed. "I heard what happened," he said. "Daniel owes my company money." Grace's heart sank. Margaret stepped forward. "Not her problem," she said. Her father held out papers. "The house was used as security," he said. Margaret read quickly, then smiled. "This signature is forged," she said. Grace gasped. Her father stared. "That means the loan is void," Margaret said. "You have no claim." Her father's shoulders dropped. "I did not know," he said softly. Grace looked at him. "I needed you," she said. He nodded. "I know," he said. "I am sorry." He turned and left. Grace stood still. Margaret took her hand. "It is over," she said. Months later, Grace stood in an art gallery in New York. Paintings covered the walls. People laughed and talked. Every piece was sold. Margaret watched from a distance, smiling. A message buzzed on her phone. "Daniel Miller sentenced for fraud." Margaret closed the message. Grace walked over. "I am free," she said. "Yes," Margaret replied. "You are." Outside, life moved on. Daniel sat in a cell, thinking of everything he lost. Grace walked into her future, stronger than before. And this time, she did not walk alone. Dear viewers, this is where Grace's story rests. Not because pain ended her life, but because courage began it. She walked into that courtroom, broken and silent. And she walked out with her voice, her future, and her strength restored. She did not win because she was loud. She won because she endured. She waited, and she stood when it mattered most. Let this story remind you that silence is not weakness, and kindness is not foolishness. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who suffer quietly until the truth stands up for them. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories of justice, strength, and hope. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Your voice matters here. Before you go, I want to ask you 3 questions. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought you were weak? What would you have done if you were standing alone, like Grace, in that courtroom? Do you believe people should always be careful how they treat others, even when they think they have power? Share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if it moved you. And remember, never underestimate a quiet person. You never know what strength they are holding inside.